Stepmother throws her out after her father's funeral, but a millionaire steps in. A grieving little girl, just after saying goodbye to her father, is thrown out by the woman who was supposed to protect her. But what happened next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about cruelty and kindness. Could a stranger's compassion really change a child's destiny forever? Stay with me, because in this story, you'll not only see how injustice can break the human heart, but also how one unexpected act of kindness can rebuild it stronger than ever. The morning sky wore a heavy gray, as though nature itself mourned with the people gathered at the churchyard. Mourners whispered prayers, heads bowed. At the center stood Sophie, a fragile 10-year-old clutching a worn teddy bear. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice silent in the sea of sorrow. The coffin lowering into the ground carried her father, her last anchor of safety. He had been her storyteller, her protector, her promise keeper. And now that promise, "You'll never be alone," lay buried with him. Behind her, another figure lingered. Dressed in black lace, with lips pressed in a thin, cold line, stood Clara, Sophie's stepmother. To outsiders, she looked like a grieving widow, but those who knew her well saw the truth in her eyes. Not grief, but irritation, resentment. Sophie had never been wanted in her new household, and now, with her father gone, Clara had no reason to hide it. As the last shovel of dirt thudding onto the coffin, Sophie's trembling lips whispered, "Goodbye, Papa." The words broke into the silence like glass shattering. But instead of comfort, Clara's words cut her deeper. "You don't belong here anymore." The large house that once echoed with laughter now felt like a hollow shell. Sophie stepped inside, her small shoes squeaking on the marble floor, only to be met with the sound of drawers being yanked open. Clara stormed through her late husband's study, ripping Sophie's clothes from hangers and tossing them into an old suitcase. "Take your things. You're not staying here," she spat, her voice devoid of any warmth. Sophie's small voice cracked. "Please, Mommy, forgive me. I'll be good." Though she had done nothing wrong, she still believed, like many children do, that maybe love could be earned if she tried hard enough. But Clara's response was cruelty. A bucket of cold water poured over her head, soaking her thin dress. She gasped, shivering as the icy drops mixed with her tears. Outside, passers-by slowed, whispering but not intervening. A man across the street shook his head and hurried away. The world, it seemed, had turned its back on her. Clara slammed the door, leaving Sophie kneeling on the driveway, suitcase spilled open, teddy bear clutched tight. The sun blazed overhead, but for her, it was the coldest day she'd ever known. And then, the sound of tires crunching against gravel. A sleek black car pulled up. From it stepped Nathaniel Pierce, a tall man in a sharp suit, his presence commanding, yet softened by something deeper: empathy. He was known in town as a successful millionaire businessman, but in that moment, titles meant nothing. What he saw was a child abandoned, humiliated, discarded like unwanted baggage. A memory stirred within him, his own childhood pain. The nights after his mother's death, the loneliness, the rejection. It was like looking into a mirror of his younger self. Without hesitation, Nathaniel crossed the driveway, kneeling beside Sophie. His expensive suit darkened from the puddle, but he didn't care. "This ends here," he said firmly, gently resting a hand on her trembling shoulder. "No one will ever treat you like this again." Clara rushed outside, furious. She shouted insults, called Sophie a burden, accused her late husband of leaving her with dead weight. But Nathaniel's eyes burned with conviction. If you can throw out a child after her father's funeral, then you don't deserve to be called a mother. From this day forward, she is no longer unwanted. I'll take her. Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Clara faltered because Nathaniel's words carried not only wealth, but authority. With a huff, she turned and slammed the door, retreating back inside. For Sophie, that slam no longer meant rejection.
It meant freedom.
Nathaniel picked up her suitcase, handed her teddy bear back, and held her hand. For the first time since her father's death, Sophie felt something stir in her chest, a flicker of hope. Together, they walked toward the black car, leaving behind the house of cruelty. The ride in Nathaniel's sleek black car felt unreal to Sophie. She pressed her tiny hands against the leather seat, her wet dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Every time she looked at the man beside her, her heart fluttered with equal parts fear and hope. Who was he, really? Why had he stopped for her when everyone else had turned away? Nathaniel glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his tone calm but reassuring. "We're almost home, Sophie. You don't need to be afraid anymore." The word home struck her like lightning. Her home had been ripped away in an instant. Could this stranger truly give her another? When the car slowed to a stop, Sophie's eyes widened. Before her stood a sprawling estate with ivy climbing its stone walls, tall windows glowing with warm light. It was nothing like the cold, hollow house she had just left. Yet instead of awe, Sophie's first instinct was fear. She clutched her teddy tighter, whispering to herself, "Don't get too comfortable, they always leave." Nathaniel opened the car door and offered his hand. Sophie hesitated, then slid out silently, her shoes dripping water on the gravel driveway. He led her inside. The staff, maids, a cook, even the butler paused in surprise. They were used to business meetings and grand galas, not a drenched little girl with tear-streaked cheeks. "This is Sophie," Nathaniel announced firmly. "From this day forward, she is family here." The words echoed in the high-ceilinged hall. Sophie blinked, almost as if she hadn't heard him correctly. Family. No one had called her that since her father's last breath. But still, doubt gnawed at her heart. Nathaniel ordered warm clothes, a hot bath, and a comforting meal. He even knelt down, eye level with her, ignoring the curious stares of his staff. "You don't have to say anything tonight," he told her gently. "Just rest. Tomorrow will be a new day." Sophie nodded faintly, her trust still buried under layers of fear. That night, Sophie lay in a soft bed with freshly laundered sheets. The room was bigger than her old bedroom, with shelves lined with books and a view of a glowing garden. But despite the comfort, sleep refused to come. When it finally did, nightmares soon followed. She dreamed of Clara's voice hissing, "You don't belong here," of her father's coffin lowering into the earth, of being shoved out the door with nothing but a suitcase and a soaked dress. Sophie jolted awake, her little body trembling. Moments later, the door creaked open. Nathaniel stood there, dressed in a plain shirt, clearly woken from his own sleep. He didn't scold her for crying. He didn't tell her to be quiet. Instead, he stepped in, carrying a book. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. I'm sorry." Nathaniel shook his head. "No apologies needed. Sometimes the heart hurts so much it won't let us rest," he said beside her bed, opening the book. "When I was a boy, after my mother died, I couldn't sleep either. My father never read to me, but I used to imagine someone would. Maybe tonight I can do that for you." He began to read. His voice was steady, deep, and soothing, each word wrapping Sophie like a warm blanket. Slowly, her sobs quieted. Her teddy bear rested against her chest, and for the first time since her father's funeral, her eyes grew heavy with something other than grief. Nathaniel stayed until her breathing steadied. Then, before leaving, he whispered, "You are safe now, Sophie, and you will never be alone again." What he didn't see was the faint smile that tugged at her lips in her sleep. While Sophie began to settle into Nathaniel's home, miles away, Clara was seething. She paced the study of her late husband's house, glass of wine in hand, fury burning in her eyes. How dare that arrogant millionaire interfere? How dare he humiliate her in front of the neighbors? To Clara, Sophie had never been more than an obstacle, a reminder that her husband's love had never fully belonged to her. And now, with Sophie gone, she should have felt relieved. But instead, Jealousy twisted inside her. Nathaniel Pierce was not just rich, he was influential, respected. If he kept Sophie, Clara's reputation would crumble. People were already whispering, questioning how a mother could abandon her stepchild on the very day of her father's funeral. "No," Clara muttered, slamming her glass onto the desk. "I won't let that brat steal everything from me." Her mind began to spin with schemes. Perhaps she could challenge Nathaniel legally. After all, Sophie wasn't his child. Or, perhaps more cruelly, she could whisper lies into the ears of society, turning them against Sophie until even Nathaniel's protection couldn't shield her. For Clara, this wasn't about Sophie's well-being. It was about control, pride, and the twisted satisfaction of seeing the girl suffer. Meanwhile, in Nathaniel's mansion, Sophie awoke to sunlight filtering through the curtains. She stretched timidly, surprised to find breakfast waiting by her bedside, a tray of pancakes with syrup and strawberries. The cook, Mrs. Bennet, peeked in with a kind smile. "Mr. Pierce said you like sweet things. He thought you might enjoy this."
Sophie's lips parted slightly. No one had ever cared enough to guess what she liked before. As she picked up her fork, a small thought flickered in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, I'm not unwanted after all. But far away, Clara's storm was brewing, promising that Sophie's new peace was only temporary. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie began to adjust, slowly, cautiously, to her new life. Each morning, sunlight poured into her spacious room, where Mrs. Bennet would greet her with warm breakfasts. The house staff, once unsure of how to behave around the shy little girl, started softening. A maid braided Sophie's hair one morning. Another taught her how to bake muffins. Laughter, though faint, returned to her lips. Nathaniel made it a point to be home for dinner every evening, no matter how demanding his business became. He asked Sophie about her day, listened intently, and never rushed her when she hesitated. To help her catch up on missed schooling, he hired a private tutor named Miss Harper, a gentle woman who taught with patience instead of scolding. At first, Sophie flinched whenever anyone raised their voice, expecting cruelty. But over time, she realized no punishment was waiting, no sharp words hidden in the corner. Each act of kindness chipped away at the walls around her heart. One evening, as Nathaniel tucked her into bed, Sophie whispered something she hadn't dared say before. "Thank you for not sending me away." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He knelt by her bed, his voice firm yet tender. "Sophie, listen to me. You are not a burden. You are not unwanted. You are exactly where you belong." For the first time, Sophie allowed herself to believe it. But while Sophie's world was healing, Clara's bitterness festered. Her social circle, the women she had once entertained with lavish teas, began to murmur behind her back. Stories of her cruelty had spread, and sympathy for Sophie grew stronger by the day. Clara could not bear being painted as the villain. Late one evening, she met with a lawyer, Mr. Stanton, in the study of her dimly lit house. "That girl doesn't belong to Pierce. She's my husband's child. Legally, I'm the guardian." Stanton adjusted his glasses cautiously. "Yes, but public opinion is against you. If you try to take her back now, the courts will scrutinize your actions. People saw what you did. It won't be easy." Clara slammed her fist on the desk. "Then I'll make it easy. Pierce thinks he can humiliate me. I'll ruin him." She began spreading poisonous whispers through town that Sophie was manipulating Nathaniel for wealth,
that Pierce was using the girl as a charity project to polish his image. The lies slithered into conversations at markets, salons, and even church gatherings. Meanwhile, Clara wrote letters to child services, painting herself as a misunderstood widow, unfairly judged. "I only want what's best for my stepdaughter," she penned with false sweetness. "But I fear Mr. Pierce has dangerous motives." Her plan was clear. If she couldn't win through love or respect, she would win through slander. Back in Nathaniel's mansion, Sophie was beginning to blossom. Miss Harper introduced her to painting, and soon her sketches filled the walls of her room. Bright gardens, teddy bears, even portraits of Nathaniel and the staff. Each drawing carried colors she once thought she'd lost forever. One afternoon, Nathaniel invited Sophie to his office. She perched nervously on a leather chair, swinging her legs. "I need your help," he told her seriously. "I'm preparing a speech for the community center about compassion, but I think your words matter more than mine. What do you think kindness means?" Sophie hesitated. No one had ever asked for her opinion before. She clutched her teddy bear and said softly, "Kindness is when someone sees you when everyone else looks away." Nathaniel paused, his throat tightening. He scribbled her words onto his notepad, then looked at her with admiration. "That's more powerful than anything I could have written." For Sophie, the moment was transformative. She realized she wasn't invisible anymore. Her voice had weight. That evening, at dinner, she surprised the staff by initiating conversation. "Mrs. Bennett, your soup is the best I've ever had." The cook flushed with delight. The butler chuckled warmly. The walls of silence around Sophie were crumbling, brick by brick.
But as she learned to speak, Clara's lies outside the mansion grew louder. Nathaniel's secretary brought him a stack of letters, all questioning his intentions with Sophie. Anonymous whispers reached his ears. Was he exploiting the girl? Was his wealth a mask for darker motives? Nathaniel closed his office door, jaw tightening. Clara's shadow was reaching for Sophie again, and this time he knew he had to prepare for a fight, not just for Sophie's safety, but for her right to a future free of cruelty. Clara's schemes had begun to bear fruit. Her whispered lies spread like wildfire throughout the town. At first, it was only murmurs, ladies at tea wondering aloud if Nathaniel Pierce, the elusive millionaire, had truly taken Sophie in out of kindness, but soon doubts hardened into accusations. At the grocery store, a neighbor muttered, "I heard he's using her for publicity." At church, another whispered, "Children shouldn't be raised by strangers, especially wealthy men with secrets." The poison worked. Clara fed the fire relentlessly. She organized luncheons where she played the victim, sighing dramatically about her poor stepdaughter who had been stolen from her arms. Her crocodile tears won sympathy, and slowly the tide of opinion shifted. One morning, Nathaniel received a formal notice, a custody position filed by Clara. She was demanding Sophie be returned to her care, claiming Pierce had undue influence and was exploiting the child for image and gain. Nathaniel read the papers at his desk, jaw clenched. When Sophie wandered into the study with her sketchbook, he quickly tucked the documents away. She mustn't see them. Not yet. But Clara had anticipated that. She didn't just want Sophie back, she wanted Sophie to doubt Nathaniel. And so her gossip reached the ears of a tutor, a maid, even the baker who sometimes delivered bread to the mansion. Soon Sophie began to overhear fragments. Why would a rich man care so much for her? Maybe he's just pretending. The fragile trusts he had built wavered. That evening, Sophie sat quietly at the dinner table, barely touching her soup. Nathaniel noticed immediately. "Sophie, is something wrong?" She fiddled with her spoon, eyes downcast. Do you only want me here because it makes you look good?" The question pierced Nathaniel like a blade.
He set down his fork, leaning toward her. "Who told you that?" Sophie shrugged, refusing to meet his gaze. People whisper, maybe you don't really care, maybe I'm just a charity case." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Sophie, look at me." When her eyes finally met his, he saw the fear in them. The old fear, the one Clara had planted long ago. "I don't care what people say. I care about you. Not for cameras, not for business, not for anyone else, for you. You matter to me, Sophie. You're family." Her lip trembled, but she wasn't fully convinced. The poison was working. She excused herself early, retreating to her room. Later that night, Mrs. Bennet found Sophie curled up by the window, clutching her teddy bear. "Darling, what troubles you?" the housekeeper asked softly. "What if I don't belong anywhere? My stepmother didn't want me. What if Mr. Pierce changes his mind too?" Mrs. Bennet sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Listen to me, child. Some people break hearts because theirs are empty, but others, like Mr. Pierce, fill hearts because theirs overflow. Don't let lies steal what's real." Sophie nodded faintly, but doubt lingered. The storm outside had finally entered her heart. The following week, the custody hearing was held in the grand courthouse. Reporters crowded the steps, flashing cameras as Nathaniel and Sophie arrived hand in hand. Clara appeared moments later, veiled in black, the very image of a grieving widow. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, feigning fragility. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Clara's lawyer painted her as a devoted stepmother, unfairly separated from her child. He proclaimed, "My client only wishes to give Sophie a stable home. Mr. Pierce, however, is not family. He's an outsider with questionable motives." Nathaniel's attorney countered, presenting witness after witness, the tutor, the maid, Mrs. Bennet, all testifying how Sophie had flourished under his care. But Clara had anticipated this. She had her own witnesses, acquaintances who claimed Nathaniel had boasted about his good deed, twisting harmless comments into damning statements. When the judge asked to hear from Sophie herself, the courtroom fell silent. The little girl stood trembling, clutching her teddy bear. Clara leaned forward with crocodile tears. "Come to me, darling. Tell them how much you miss your home." Sophie's small voice quivered. "Home?" She looked from Clara's pleading eyes to Nathaniel's steady, patient gaze. Her chest tightened with confusion. Both adults were watching her, waiting. The weight of choice was unbearable. Finally, she whispered, I don't know."
Gasps filled the room. Clara smiled faintly, sensing victory. Nathaniel, however, didn't flinch. He walked to the stand, knelt before Sophie, and said quietly, loud enough for all to hear, "You don't have to know right now. You don't have to choose for anyone but yourself. Just tell the truth, Sophie. What do you feel in your heart?" The judge leaned forward, eyes softening. "Yes, child. Speak honestly. No one will punish you." Sophie swallowed hard. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I feel safe with Mr. Pierce. He listens. He cares. My stepmother, she hurt me. She made me feel unwanted." The courtroom erupted. Clara shot to her feet, face twisted with fury. "Lies! That girl is ungrateful." "Enough, Mrs. Whitmore," the judge thundered. "Sit down at once." Clara's mask cracked completely. The public saw her not as the grieving widow, but as the bitter, cruel woman she truly was. The judge struck his gavel. "Custody remains with Mr. Pierce. Case dismissed." Sophie exhaled shakily. Nathaniel wrapped an arm around her, shielding her from Clara's venomous glare. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored, but all Sophie heard was Nathaniel's steady voice. "It's over now. You're safe." For the first time, she truly believed it.
Clara stormed out of the courthouse that day, her face red with humiliation.
For years, she had crafted a persona of refinement and elegance, but now the entire town had seen the venom beneath. Her neighbors avoided her on the street. Invitations to luncheons stopped arriving. Even her so-called friends, who once whispered eagerly at her side, now crossed the road to avoid association with her. At first, she raged. She filed complaints, spread new rumors, even tried to drag Nathaniel's reputation into the mud once more. But the tide had turned. The more she shouted, the smaller she seemed. One afternoon, Sophie passed by Clara's old house while Nathaniel's driver escorted her to a piano lesson. Through the open window, she glimpsed Clara sitting alone at the dining table, surrounded by untouched dishes. No servants bustled about, no friends sat laughing by her side. She was a queen without a court. For a moment, Sophie felt a pang of pity. Despite all the cruelty, Clara looked empty, lonely, like someone who had built her life on power and appearances only to watch it crumble. She turned her gaze away, clutching her teddy bear tighter. She no longer needed Clara's approval. The world had finally seen the truth. Weeks later, Nathaniel invited Sophie into his study. The desk that once held Clara's custody papers now bore something far different, a sealed envelope from his lawyer. "Sophie," he began gently, "I've been thinking a lot about your future. I don't want you to ever feel uncertain again. That's why I've made arrangements." Her brow furrowed. "Arrangements?" "Yes, officially, legally. I'd like to adopt you, if you'll let me." The room grew very still. Sophie blinked, trying to absorb his words. Adopt? It was more than safety. It was belonging. It was family. Her voice trembled. You want me? Forever?" Nathaniel knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. "Forever, Sophie. You're not just someone I care for. You're my daughter in every way that matters. This just makes it official." For a long moment, Sophie didn't speak. Then, with tears welling in her eyes, she flung her arms around him. Yes, please, Mr. Pierce." His own throat tightened as he whispered, then it settled. "From now on, you'll never doubt where you belong." The adoption process was swift, thanks to the court's knowledge of Clara's cruelty and Nathaniel's spotless record. Within months, Sophie's new birth certificate carried his name. The day she signed it, Sophie felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She was no longer drifting. She was home. With legal battles behind them, Sophie's life began to blossom. She enrolled in school, where she quickly proved herself a gifted student. Though the whispers of gossip lingered at first, they soon faded as classmates saw her smile brighten, her confidence grow. Every morning, Nathaniel drove her to school himself when he wasn't traveling. They shared little rituals, singing along to old songs on the radio, stopping for hot chocolate on Fridays, and laughing at inside jokes only they understood. At night, he still read her stories, but now Sophie often read to him as well, proudly showing how her voice grew stronger with every page. The nightmares of abandonment faded, replaced by dreams of gardens, sunshine, and laughter. One spring afternoon, Sophie asked Nathaniel if she could visit her father's grave again. He agreed, and together they placed fresh wildflowers on the stone. Sophie knelt, whispering, "Daddy, I miss you, but I'm okay now. Mr. Pierce takes care of me, and I think you'd like him." Nathaniel stood silently a few steps back, giving her space, but when Sophie turned, she reached for his hand.
"He's not replacing you, Daddy. He's just helping me be strong." The sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating her tear-streaked but smiling face. Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently, his heart swelling with both pride and humility. Healing was not instant. Some days Sophie still struggled with memories of cruelty, but each time Nathaniel was there, steady, patient, unyielding. Together they built not just a home, but a future. Years later, townsfolk would look back and say the turning point wasn't the courtroom battle, nor Clara's fall of grace. It was the simple image of a girl once abandoned, now laughing freely beside the man who chose to stand by her when no one else would. Sophie grew not just into a scholar, but into a beacon of kindness. She volunteered at shelters, helped children who faced abandonment, and often told them, "Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who shows up when you need them most."
Nathaniel never sought recognition. His joy was in the quiet moments. Sophie's first recital, her first award, her first smile after a hard day. For him, wealth had never been measured in dollars. It was measured in love. And so, the story that began with loss ended with hope. A stepmother's cruelty had tried to break a little girl's spirit, but compassion rebuilt it stronger than ever. Because sometimes, when life takes everything, kindness steps in. And when it doesn't just save a child, it creates a family. Time has a way of softening even the harshest wounds. Those scars remain to remind us of where we've been. For Sophie, the seasons after her adoption passed like chapters in a new book, each one brighter than the last. In summer, they spent afternoons at the park. He taught her to ride a bicycle, jogging beside her until she could balance on her own. Her laughter echoed as she raced down tree-lined paths, hair flying freely, no longer weighed down by sorrow. In autumn, they carved pumpkins together, their study filled with candlelight and the scent of cinnamon pies. Nathaniel would often chuckle, saying, "You've got more talent for this than I do," as Sophie's careful hands transformed pumpkins into little works of art. In winter, the mansion became a haven of warmth. Sophie decorated the tall Christmas tree, hanging ornaments that once belonged to Nathaniel's late mother. "These are yours now, too," he said, placing the final star atop the tree. Sophie had never felt so included in something sacred. And in spring, they walked through gardens blooming with color. Sophie asked endless questions about the flowers, the birds, the way the world seemed to start fresh after every winter. Nathaniel always answered patiently, knowing her curiosity was proof she was healing. Life for Sophie was no longer about survival, it was about living. But while Sophie's world flourished, Clara's crumbled. After losing her influence in court, debts she had long hidden from the community came to light. She sold her jewelry, her fine clothes, even her late husband's house just to stay afloat. The old proud stepmother now lived a small flat on the outskirts of town. Neighbors whispered about the irony. The woman who once looked down on others now lived in shadows. She grew bitter, blaming everyone but herself. One evening, she saw Sophie and Nathaniel passing through town. Sophie, now radiant with health and happiness, held Nathaniel's hand as they laughed together. Clara froze in place. For the first time, she realized something that shook her to the core. She hadn't just lost a battle for custody, she had lost the chance to truly love and be loved. She had chosen pride over compassion, cruelty over kindness, and now she had nothing. Though Sophie noticed her standing there, she didn't feel anger anymore, only a quiet sadness. Without a word, She walked on, leaving Clara in the shadows of her own choices. Years passed, and Sophie grew into a young woman filled with ambition and heart. She excelled at school, later earning a scholarship to study social work. Her dream wasn't riches or fame. It was to ensure no child ever felt as abandoned as she once did. She wanted to build shelters, create safe spaces, and offer hope where it was nearly lost. When Nathaniel heard of her plans, he couldn't hide his pride. "You're choosing to give back, Sophie. That's the greatest wealth anyone can have." Together, they established the Pierce Foundation for Children, an organization dedicated to helping orphans and neglected children. Sophie became its voice, often speaking to crowds about her own journey. "I was once a little girl with nothing but a teddy bear and tears, but someone stepped in, someone who chose kindness when the world turned away. That kindness saved me, and now I want to pass it on." Every time she spoke, audiences wept, but more importantly, they acted. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up, and children's lives began to change. Her pain had been transformed into purpose. One evening, after a long day of work, Sophie and Nathaniel stood on the balcony of their home, watching the sun set, paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. "You know," Nathaniel said softly, "your father would be so proud of you." Sophie leaned her head against his arm. "I hope so. I think about him every day, but I also thank God for you, Nathaniel. You gave me more than a home. You gave me a future." Nathaniel smiled, eyes glistening. "No, Sophie. You gave me a future. You reminded me what truly matters. Wealth can build empires, but love builds families." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophie whispered, "Then we'll keep building, together." So, what began as a tale of loss and cruelty ended in transformation. Sophie's journey showed that even in the darkest valleys, kindness can light a path forward. Clara's choices were a warning. When pride and cruelty guide your steps, loneliness becomes your only companion. But Nathaniel's choices were proof of something greater. When compassion leads, lives are saved, families are formed, and futures are rewritten. Sophie's story reminds us that family isn't always who we're born to, it's who chooses to love us when we need it most. And to every viewer watching, remember this: somewhere out there, a simple act of kindness could be the miracle someone is praying for.